Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're just giving everyone about 30 seconds or so to actually enter the webinar, but it's great to have you all here. We're looking forward to speaking to you about some of the partial dieback trials. So we'll just give it another maybe 5 seconds or so, just as those last few people jump in, and we might grab a start. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Partial Dieback Trials Project Update. My name is Ryan Hall. I'm a research scientist with Applied Horticultural Research, and it's great to have you all here. Before we begin, I'd just like to let you all know that this session is being recorded, and that once the webinar is concluded, the recording will be published on the AHR website. So you'll be able to revisit any of the content from today and share it with your colleagues. Today's webinar is part of the Meat and Livestock Australia funded pasture dieback program, where we've been running field trials across Queensland to better understand the condition, evaluate management options, and improve our knowledge of mealybug biology and its role in dieback. We'll be sharing results from the AHR trials, some DPI fieldwork, and current insights from our QUT research partners and their trial work as well. I'm joined today by three fantastic speakers. Dr. Naomi Diplock is a research scientist and plant pathologist with Applied Horticultural Research. She has more than 20 years of experience in dieback phenomena in various situations and has led AHR's dieback trials for the past 5 years or so. I'm just going to make sure that person's just joined, just keeps their self on mute. We've had this happen before, apologies. We've also got Stuart Buck joining us. Stuart is a pasture agronomist with the Department of Primary Industries in Rockhampton. He has over 30 years of experience in cropping and pasture systems in central Queensland. The focus of Stuart's work over the last 17 years is assisting graziers to adopt improved pasture management practices, including incorporating legumes. He has also coordinated the department's pasture dieback research and extension program over the last 10 years. And finally, Associate Professor Caroline Hoxwell, also known as Carrie, is with the Queensland University of Technology. Carrie has worked in tropical crop protection for over 35 years with a focus on solutions for agricultural industries. She leads the pasture dieback team at QUT, focusing on the mealybug, Heliococcus somervillei, its biology, natural enemies, and management. As we just get into this webinar, we'll just do a little bit of some housekeeping. So just letting you all know that this is a Zoom webinar, and for those of you watching, you're a Zoom attendee. This means that you won't be able to have your camera on or your microphone on. And unfortunately, it means you can't see how many people are here. We did have over 130 registrations, of which a good chunk of you have joined from all over. So it's really great to see you all here. You have a few controls for yourself to work with. For any general comments, you can use the chat function. That allows you to talk to the panelists here. Any Q&A questions and answers that you'd like answered in the Q&A session, please use the Q&A function here. And if you'd prefer to speak during the Q&A session, we can monitor the raise hand function, and this basically tells us that you'd like to come off mute and speak. We did initially not expect so many registrations, so whilst we've scheduled an hour for this webinar, we're happy to hang on and answer questions at the end, but don't feel like you need to stay on for all that time. Carrie will be joining us from a motel in Mauer at the moment, as they're out doing a lot of field trials, so they may not have their camera off just to preserve their bandwidth. The agenda today, we will go through the AHR field trials, looking at Naomi's work with legumes around management and variety susceptibility. Stuart will then discuss the findings and management strategies from the QDPI field trials, and then Carrie will speak about mealybug biology and its role in dieback. After those have concluded, we'll then start a Q&A session as well. So with that, I might hand over to Naomi and let this show get on the road. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'll just share my screen. Great. Hopefully you can all see that okay. Ryan, let me know if you can't.
Naomi.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to talk about the results from our pasture dieback trials, looking at different management tools and variety susceptibility. So first of all, just a bit of a brief summary for those of you without a background in pasture dieback. So pasture dieback's a disorder caused by the pasture mealybug Heliococcus summerbilii. That's this little guy here on the blades of grass. You can see it's very, very small. It leads to reduced vigor and death of affected grasses, and it can reoccur over multiple years, causing major production and economic losses. So it affects mostly tropical and subtropical grasses, but some native grasses are also susceptible. Broadleaf plants such as legumes and brassicas and many broadleaf weeds or other just weeds are not affected. So how do we identify it? The early signs are poor vigor and leaf discoloration, red, yellow, and purple. So you can see here in the buffel grass, a real reddening and yellowing. In Rhodes grass, it might just be yellow. In spear grass, it might be more purple, same as in the bisset here. And this progresses to patches of dead grass, as you can see in this photo, and it's often followed by the growth of broadleaf plants. So active dieback's most visible during late spring to early autumn. So starting with these symptoms and progressing through to plant death. It can look similar to other issues. So you need to confirm by checking for pasture mealybug at the correct time of year. They can be really hard to find as well. So difficult after cool or dry weather, and they're usually absent once the grass is dead. So once you see grass looking like this, you won't find mealybug. There's just nothing left for them to eat. So healthy broadleaf plants within dead grass can also indicate dieback. So like this one here with the Wincassia moving through the bisset bluegrass. So mostly I'm going to focus on the results of our field trials. So these were looking at management. So how do we produce feed in dieback affected pasture? We weren't looking at how you control the mealybug, but basically how do you live with mealybug? So I have 4 field sites based at Jambin, Theodore, Gita and Bigoden, looking at buffel grass and bisset bluegrass. And these were established on active dieback properties. So they were established in March 2021. So we're about 4.5 years in, and they're replicated trials. So there's 4 replicates in each of the 4 field sites. So my different treatments for management were looking at just natural regeneration. We were looking at stick raking, and in one location we looked at cultivation. And in those areas that were stick raked, we then just broadcast seed on the ground. We didn't integrate it into the ground at all. But we looked at a mix of different pasture mixes with a focus on Rhodes grasses, legume mixes with things like Desmanthus, butterfly pea, stylo, and then a mix of both of those. So pasture mixes and legume mixes with everything listed above. And then also resowing the existing grass. So in the case of Jambin and Theodore, resowing buffel mix, and in the case of Bigoden and Gita, resowing bisset bluegrass. Each of those was then also repeated with or without fertilizer. So that photo shows our trial site after stick raking prior to sowing. So you can see it was pretty rough. We didn't create a perfect seed bed. It was mostly just to remove the bulk of the grass on the ground to allow some seed soil contact. And yeah, it was just a very, very rough passover with the stick rake. Just a brief method of assessment so that you understand how I got to my results. So we assessed the different ground cover percentage in full plots. So what percentage of different grasses was in each of those plots, or different weeds or legumes. And we had 250 or 50 by 50 centimetre quadrats per plot, which I then cut and collect all of the plant material inside each of those quadrats. I then sat and sorted those quadrats into grasses, legumes, and weeds. You can imagine that's a really fun job, having 100 bags of biomass and sorting all of those out, and weighed them fresh, dried again at 50 degrees, and reweighed to get my dry matter biomass of each of those different components. I then used my in-field visual assessments of the proportions of different grasses to apply that to my biomass to see the proportion of each grass in the biomass. So to show you some results, this was this year in Theodore, 4 years after sowing. So natural regeneration, we didn't do anything, we just left it, managed for weeds, buffel grass, stick raking only, and then some different Rhodes grasses, Endura Rhodes or Reclaimer Rhodes, with fertilizer, without fertilizer, and with Desmanthus or without. And you can see there wasn't much difference in the biomass across any of my treatments. What is interesting though is, and we will look at what that biomass is made up of in grasses particularly. So in my natural regeneration, or where we resowed buffel, stick raked only, we had a little bit of US Uganda buffel coming back, but the majority of it was actually Billawilla buffel. Now, when we set this side up, the majority of the grass was US Uganda buffel, but it had mostly died out with the dieback and been replaced with Billawilla buffel. In the plots that we had resown, you can see there's very little of that Billawilla buffel moving in. So it's really important, if you're going to manage for natural recovery, that you know what your seed bank is and you monitor what's coming up, because while we had really good biomass in those plots, the components of that biomass were not as good in terms of desirable pasture. So this is what it looked like. This was our billow buffel in the natural regeneration. Our buffel not looking too healthy. Stick rake only, it got quite weedy because there was no competition for the weeds. The Reclaimer Rhodes, while it's a bit thirsty, it was looking pretty good. It still had some dieback symptoms, but just was holding up much better than compared to the other plots. Same with the Endura Rhodes and Desmanthus, and the Reclaimer Rhodes and Desmanthus. So just to show you briefly the same data at Bigoton, this was interesting. Initially, these natural regenerations, stick rake and Bisset, well, they had much less Bisset and much more weeds. And where we have resown with the grass mix, which was the mostly Rhodes grass, we had much more Rhodes grass and almost no Bisset. But over time here, you can see that the Bisset is slowly coming back. So this is a site where natural regeneration is doing a little bit better than on the other sites. However, you can still see these white blocks here. These are our weeds. And then also in the legumes, where we've sown only legumes, we don't get that competition against the weeds. So the grass mix for resowing has been helpful here, but not as helpful as on some of the other sites, and long term may not hold up as well as the natural regeneration we're yet to see. Our Gita biomass, you can see here that our grass mix and with fertilizer, there's not really much of a difference in adding fertilizer after 4 years. There was in the initial years, but we only applied it when we established the trial. Grass mix and grass mix with legumes, with and without fertilizer, are doing much better than our natural regeneration cultivation only, or resowing with Bisset or our legumes. And again, we have this weed management issue in these plots, whereas where we've resown with the Rhodes grass, we get good competition. And if we look at what this is made up of, this is quite interesting as well, because this was all Bisset to begin with, or majority Bisset, whereas now this light green colour is the Bisset. We have very little Bisset coming up, and these plots are actually being colonised by the Rhodes grass, which is what we had planted in these 4 plots. So because it's not as affected by dieback, every year the Bisset's getting hit by dieback and it's dying off, but the Rhodes grass is beginning to take over in those sites. So this is an example of where resowing has been really, really successful and is still holding up 4 years on. Just some photos of this site. At the front here, we have the Bisset resow. At the back, we have natural regeneration. On the left back, we have the grass mix, and at the front, the grass and legume mix. And when I came out to do this assessment, I actually had to phone the landholder and ask if he'd been spraying, more than just the spot spraying weeds, because I could not believe this clear line moving down from the Bisset to the Rhodes grass and how badly affected the Bisset was compared to the Rhodes. So we did have some dieback starting in the Rhodes, but you can see it's just nowhere near as impacted as the Bisset grass here. Some photos here. Natural regeneration was quite weedy and suffering dieback. The Bisset, you can see bad dieback, the purpling and dying off. Cultivation created a beautiful weed seed bed, some legumes popping up, but mostly weeds. But our grass mix was looking fantastic, and our grass and legume mix was looking really great as well. So I collected this data over 4 years, and we have our total biomass. So you can see that where we have resown with our grass mixes or with legumes, we have much better biomass, up to 30 tonnes per hectare of dry matter over 4 years. And at Theodore, the same, lower amounts, different country, but again, where we've replanted, much better biomass in 4 years. So I did a very brief return on investment. Now, this is just using some pretty rough figures, looking at the tonnes per hectare of feed that we got and using the cost of hay as an equivalent. So I know there's better ways of doing this, using weight of cattle in and weight of cattle out, but this was using the data we had just to give us an indication if it was worthwhile. So cost of cultivation, or the total cost to set up, my figures here are about $620 per hectare. I've heard much higher figures and also lower figures. So it really depends on everybody's situation, but this is what it cost us. And we ended up with a benefit cost ratio in Gita of 8.9 and in Theodore of 2.8 in these situations. So the key results here is reseeding with pasture plus legume mix works. Over 4 years, our resown pastures have produced 8.5 tonnes per hectare or 25 tonnes per hectare in Gita of usable feed. Replanting a pasture gave a positive financial return in these cases. So, and these resown pastures are persisting 4 years after sowing at all of the sites. Keeping in mind that broadleaf weeds do restrict legume use, so in locations with bad parthenium or other weed problems, it might not be possible to sow legumes due to the need to spray. And also remembering that while legumes are very useful and improving soil health, they have so many benefits, but they do change the pasture management approach, so you need to be mindful. So in some instances, our desired species are returning slowly, but they may also be attacked again by dieback, we don't know. And in some of the natural regeneration plots, other less desirable species are establishing. So Indian cooch in a lot of instances, or things like Billawilla buffle that might not be as desirable. So each situation is different, and you need to assess your own soil seed bank, your own soil type, your own conditions to work out whether this is actually going to be a beneficial thing to do. Just very briefly, I'd like to talk about my variety trials. We had these at the same 4 locations. So we looked at 15 different varieties. So these we did cultivate and fertilize the trial plots. You can see us marking all of the little plots out there. I'm just going to talk about the worst and the best. So basically, this is just my results from Gita, so I don't have the buffle grass, but it's pretty much the same as the Bisset. Hosting really high numbers of mealybugs compared to Gatton Panic that still hosts mealybugs, or Tully grass and Mekong that basically do not host mealybugs. So looking at Tully and Mekong as really the best for no mealybug support, but for Gatton Panic, it will still keep some there. So they may not be suitable for your situation. So this trial is only assessing tolerance to mealybug, but we're really finding that this Mekong Brasantha and the Tully grass humidicola, we just don't find mealybug on. To show you some photos of that, this is the buffle grass with the reddening from the dieback, and the mealybug are often found in the thatch layer. The Bisset, showing typical symptoms of dieback, and it has a really thick layer of thatch, and we find thousands and thousands of mealybugs in this thatch layer and on the ground under the thatch. Whereas in comparison, the Mekong Brasantha, there's zero thatch layer, no mealybugs ever found. Same with the tully grass, no mealybugs observed and no thatch layer. So I think it's probably got a lot to do with the structure of the grass as well. So just to recap on my take-home messages, reseeding with pastures plus legume mix works in terms of managing dieback. Using more tolerant species is really successful. It can give a positive financial return. In these cases, the resown grass and legumes are persisting 4 years after sowing at all of the trial sites. And the best varieties for dieback tolerance tend to be Mekong Brasantha and tully grass. And these are the varieties without a thick thatch layer. We need to keep continuing these. So we're reaching 5 years on these sites, but it will be really interesting to see where these go over the next few years. And just that each situation is different. We're seeing a similar trend across all of the sites, but there's also differences depending on the site. So just want to say a big thanks to Meat and Livestock Australia, MLA, for their funding and support for these trials, to the landholders who've generously hosted the trials across Queensland. So Jeff Maynard, Graham Pearson, Chris Grant, and Tony Roffey, and Bernie and Lee Wixon, and my colleagues and collaborators who have assisted with the trial establishment, monitoring and assessment. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Naomi. Yeah, I've got my own personal connection to those trials. I did help set them up with you as well. So very keen to see some of those results coming through. We might now move on to Stuart Buck to discuss some of their results from their field trials with the QDPI. Thanks, Stu.
Thanks, Ryan. Hopefully you can see my screen there.
Yep.
Look great.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, no, thank you very much. Yeah, Stuart Buck based at Rockhampton. Today I won't really have time to outline the results of every field trial that we've done. So I'm going to just briefly outline what the DPI has done and summarise the key learnings and messages from the collective research and our experiences from working with many hundreds of graziers across the state. So, and as I'm just one of a larger team, I just wanted to firstly acknowledge, I'll get this to work, here we go, to acknowledge the larger DPI team. We've got multiple entomologists and plant pathologists and virologists and nematodologists and so forth, and agronomists that have helped out over the number of years of our research. I want to also acknowledge the graziers who have hosted our field trials and supported the activities that we've done, and also to acknowledge and say thank you to our funding bodies, the Queensland Government, the Australian Government through the MLA Donor Company as well. So thank you to all those people. So this is a collective bit of work, and I'm just presenting on behalf of our DPI team. So Naomi's done a pretty good job to outline what pasture dieback is and so forth, so I won't sort of talk about that, but this is a typical example here, a photo of a grass pasture heavily affected by dieback, and the legumes, which are the green plants through that paddock there, are growing very happily, although there is some little bit of buffer in the background. But where dieback is occurring, I just thought it'd be interesting to sort of show you guys the latest map that we've produced. So dieback is really occurring across northern, central and southern Queensland, and it's also affecting tropical pastures in northeastern New South Wales. Unfortunately, dieback is continuing to spread through all these areas. So in central Queensland, where I'm based, it's sort of heading west. In southern Queensland, it's heading south and southeast. And also in northern New South Wales, it's heading south too. And the latest reports are in that Singleton area. And I suppose you could say almost a central New South Wales coastal area. But unfortunately, yeah, it's continuing to spread. And for us in Queensland, the hotspot is where we're getting most of our inquiries is from southern Queensland at the moment. So this photo here is a photo of a paddock that was affected by dieback. So this is the very first paddock of dieback that I saw in central Queensland in 2015. So at that time, all the symptoms of dieback were present. So we've got affected or sick plants. There were healthy broadleaf weeds, not in that photo, but also in the paddock. But at that time, we didn't really have much of an idea of what was causing this sort of issue. And one of the confusing aspects at that time was that some grasses were unaffected. And so in this photo here, we've got Billywilla Buffle, a green pasture there that isn't affected, versus the Gander in the foreground and the background that was heavily affected. And that was quite interesting at the time to work out what was happening. Let's go forward. Here we go. Okay. So because dieback was affecting pastures across large areas of Queensland, we needed to learn more about this condition. So we embarked on our statewide characterisation. And what that really meant was, over about a 6-year period, we surveyed hundreds of producers across all areas of Queensland to gain a better understanding of the condition, mainly what species were affected, and what management practices and so forth, and soil types as well. So this started in 2016 and ran through until about 2022. So this information, including results of the research trials, which I'll outline in a minute, has assisted us to greatly understand dieback and, importantly, understand what producers were going through in different regions and situations across Queensland. And so we've been able to then assist producers across the state by recommending reliable management practices that can restore pasture productivity. And this photo here is just a drone shot of affected pasture in central Queensland on the left-hand side of that fence line, or the track there on the right. Okay. Yeah, okay. So over about a 5-year period, we've undertaken a number of research trials to understand the cause or causes of pasture dieback. To do this, we have undertaken laboratory, glasshouse, and field research to investigate a range of potential causal agents, including soil fertility or nutrition and chemistry, fungi, viruses, nematodes, ground pearls, and the pasture mealybug. There's some photos there of some of their experiments over time. And this again started in 2016 and finished in about 2022. So the conclusion of this work is summarised in this slide here. So for dieback to occur, there needs to be a susceptible grass or grasses in the pasture with the pasture mealybug, and that combination equals pasture dieback. No other organism was found to cause pasture dieback in our research. However, there is likely to be secondary pathogens such as fungi or viruses that could be occurring that accelerate plant death. However, as most things in agriculture and life, it's not quite that simple. There are a number of factors that can impact the prevalence and severity of dieback, and these include pasture factors such as a type of grass present and a tolerance to the pasture mealybug and the amount of pasture biomass. There are seasonal factors, so hot and humid conditions, which increase the growth rate of the pasture, can increase the prevalence and severity of dieback. And there are also insect and pathogen factors, so high numbers of pasture mealybug and the possibility of the presence of other pathogens can increase the prevalence of dieback, whereas the presence of predatory insects can decrease the presence or the prevalence of dieback. So there are things that increase, but also factors that can decrease the prevalence and severity of dieback in any situation. And lastly, we've conducted a large number of trials to assess the outcome of different management practices or practices that a grazier could implement to restore pasture productivity. So since 2018, we've undertaken about 10 field trials, all up now, investigating many different management practices. And I'll just run through these. There are quite a few of them. So we've looked at a whole range of different practices, including annual spring burn or an annual spring slash, annual fertiliser application. We've also looked at spraying out insecticides or fungicides. We've also investigated the impact of a single cultivation without any reseeding. There was a combination of fallowing prior to sowing either grass-only pastures or mixtures versus grass and legume mixtures with and without fertiliser and with and without insecticide. We've also investigated long fallow being about 3 years prior to reseeding grasses to see if that makes any difference. We've also looked at sowing break crops, primarily annual forages, prior to reseeding a grass pasture. And we've also had an experiment looking at seeding single grass species between Leucaena rows where the existing buffel pasture, in this case, had been fully wiped out by dieback. So this work started in 2018 and is still continuing, although some of these have stopped, but most of them are still continuing. So what's been the outcome of this research? So again, collectively, this is the outcome of all that work. So there are really 2 management strategies or options that can restore pasture productivity. And the first one is to manage for natural recovery, and Naomi mentioned this in her presentation just before. And the 2 practices, or the 2 things that a grazier can do to actually do that, is to adjust stocking rate based on the forage availability. So you do a forage budget, or maybe even treat the weeds and bare patches if you can, or if possible. And the second strategy or option is to improve the pasture, primarily really through sowing tolerant grasses and legumes. This can be done in pretty much all situations, albeit probably in smaller areas and not arable situations. But I would argue that pretty much every situation you can get some seed out somehow, somewhere. Some graziers are also sowing annual forage crops, or in some cases grain crops. And with our field trials, we've investigated forage sorghum, lab, and oats. And I think there is a word of caution with forage sorghum or the tropical forages that they can host a mealybug. But this practice is effective, but only in certain situations where machinery can access those paddocks. So it's not for everyone by all means. And lastly, we're not recommending treating the mealybug with either a pesticide or insecticide or to burn them. So these have had mixed results in our field trials, and probably others as well. And there are no current registrations for insecticides for mealybug control in tropical pastures in Queensland or New South Wales, from my understanding. So that is not recommended at this point in time. So again, the concept is that the 2 options that are most effective is to either manage for natural recovery or to improve the pasture, which lines up nicely with what Naomi was mentioning before. Right, so overall, what can be done about pasture dieback? Well, based on our current understanding, there's no reliable or practical prevention strategies, so it's very difficult to really stop dieback from coming, particularly if you've got susceptible pastures with the mealybug in the local area. There are also no cost-effective eradication strategies either, so we can't reliably and cost-effectively remove the mealybug. But there are effective management practices that can restore productivity, but only if they're done correctly. And that's probably the kicker. And it can be expensive, but if done right, it can work very well. Righto, so all of our research trials are on the Future Beef website. So go to futurebeef.com.au and search on pasture dieback. We also have multiple fact sheets, videos, and a podcast, which includes graziers of how they are managing pasture dieback on their properties. Also to note that over the last couple of years, we've run probably more than 25 extension events to over 1,000 people across the state. So if you wanted to participate in any of those, because there are more coming up, just hop onto the website and sign up to the Queensland Pastures newsletter. That's where we advertise most of our stuff there, and also through Future Beef Facebook as well. And we are still undertaking pasture dieback research. This is currently being undertaken through the Queensland Pasture Resilience Program. This is a partnership between the Queensland Government and the Australian Government through the MLA donor category. So I just wanted to put a plug for that. So, but yes, most of our field work in pasture dieback is continuing through that program. And lastly, that's my contact details if you wish to talk to me or email me. And hopefully we can end up with pastures looking a bit like that. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, really interesting stuff coming through there from the DPI as well. I've just note that there are a few questions coming through, so don't forget to use the Q&A function if you'd like to have a question answered in the Q&A session. We might now move to Carrie from Queensland University of Technology to speak about the pasture mealybug. So Carrie, please take it on.
Forgive me if I don't put my camera on. I don't think it's important, but I am operating on a hotspot on my phone out of a motel room in central Queensland, so it's all good fun. Oops, sorry, Ryan. And I just want to go to this, and hopefully I've got the right screen.
Yep, it's
Is that right? Great. Thanks very much, Ryan. So we've been doing quite a lot of work on the pasture mealybug as the cause of pasture dieback, and a lot of the results that are early results from this were published in 2022 as final reports to Meat Livestock Australia. They're widely available online, and if you search pasture dieback at QUT, you'll find most of those, or you'll find them through MLA. So I'm not going to go through the quite extensive work in there that demonstrated that mealybug is the cause of pasture dieback, but I am going to give you some updates on that work and what we're looking at in terms of management and trials, demonstration plots, and so on. So this is the team we currently have. We have 3 PhD students who are working on different aspects of pasture dieback and the pasture mealybug and the resilience and fight back against the mealybug with my co-CI, Associate Professor Brett Williams at QUT, and our 2 excellent senior research assistants who are Genevieve Dixon and Darcy Patrick. Darcy mostly looks after the field trials and demonstration plots, and Jen looks after variety testing and laboratory assays. So what is the cause of pasture dieback? It is the mealybug Heliococcus somervillei. It has caused dieback in the past. It caused it in Koroy in Queensland in 1926 and was identified then by Bill Somerville. And when Brooks did the formal description in the 70s, she named it after him as Heliococcus somervillei. So it was found in Koroy in 1926, which is on the Sunshine Coast of Queensland for those who aren't from around these parts. It's also found later in 1938, causing dieback-like symptoms in the tablelands west of Cairns. It occurred in the 1990s, briefly in New Caledonia, again causing pasture dieback. It was identified in Queensland in 2016 by Biosecurity Queensland staff in a mixed population of variants, which I'll talk about in a little while. It's also been found in Puerto Rico and Barbados, and USDA have identified that as Heliococcus somervillei. It's also been very recently reported causing dieback in extensive areas of pasture in Texas, in the USA, by Texas A&M, and there are reports from them online available if you search for them, or we can put you in touch with them. And it's also been found in the 1970s and 1980s on sugarcane in Pakistan and rice in West Bengal. It's also very recently been reported causing problems on sugarcane in Mexico. And we know from our work that it also affects sugarcane in addition to a very wide range of grasses and some sedges. So it's a global problem, but it's been a really serious problem in Australia. The work on how it causes pasture dieback is available in the reports that I mentioned before. But very briefly, the early instars of the mealybug are sucking pests. The adults aren't. The adult males are flighted and don't feed on plants, and the adult females stop feeding once they're mated and disperse and don't feed either. It's the early instars that do the damage. They inject saliva into the plant and they very rapidly suppress the plant defenses within 24 to 72 hours. The plant may live, but it can be unproductive and it will eventually die, either from the effects of the mealybug if the mealybugs don't die out and aren't removed, and it can be very heavily affected by secondary infections, and particularly the fungus Fusarium and many different strains and variants of Fusarium. It's not just one. It's a all Fusarium species seems to opportunistically take advantage of the plants whose immune systems have been compromised by this feeding by the mealybug. The current dieback that we're witnessing from about the 2000s onwards is a new variant. The variant is widespread from North Queensland down to northern New South Wales and points south. And we're grateful to our colleagues at New South Wales DPI who provided those specimens, and at Biosecurity Queensland who've done a lot of this work with us with specimens we've submitted. The old variant is the one that was found in Kin-Kin. It's also the one that's shown up in Puerto Rico and Barbados. It was found in a mixed population with the new variant in 2016 by Mark Schutze and Desley Tree, where both the old and the new variant were coexisting on leaves of the plant, not very far from where it was originally found in 1938. And again, in Kin-Kin in Queensland, not very far from where Somerville found it in 1926, we found a mixed population over 2 years in 2021-22 of old and new variants coexisting on the same plants and in the same areas and maintaining those populations. The new variant is the one that's causing the damage. It's the extensive one. The old variant populations are very small, heavily outnumbered, and very localized. Roughly where they have always been reported. This new variant seems to have come in probably in the 1990s when there were some records of ill thrift, which might also be pasture rundown. But the first confirmation we have of the new variant is in this mixed population from Atherton in 2016. We don't yet know what the Texas and Mexico variants are. They haven't been identified, or it hasn't been reported at any rate. We're sure USDA will be onto that, and so will Texas A&M. We know it's a new variant because we've looked at, and I'm sorry, the slides here have slumped the figures down, but we're looking at the pores on the legs. It's not something you would do in the paddock. But with Biosecurity Queensland, with Mark Schutze in particular, has been categorizing this. And a particular group of pores are clearly absent on all of the specimens. And we've examined over 132 specimens of this mealybug from across the Australian outbreak range. They are completely absent on the new variant, but they're present to some degree in all of the old variants that have been found in Puerto Rico and Barbados. There are other minor differences as well, but that is the major one, is this absence of these pores. And this is the kind of thing that might elevate this to a new species status. That's going to go beyond our work, but there is certainly some work to be done to confirm whether it is actually Heliococcus somervillei or a new species, but it's certainly a new variant of that mealybug. We've done molecular barcoding work to show its relationship between the old specimens that we've been able to find and extract DNA from, and the new the old variants that we've managed to find and extract DNA from, and all the new variants. We've sequenced over 100 barcodes from the mealybugs themselves. And they're a little difficult to tell apart based on the DNA 18S, 28S, and Dynamin markers. For those of you who are from a technical bent, but the really interesting result has been when we've looked at the sequences of the bacterial symbiont that lives inside of the mealybug. And the symbiont's very important in the health and success of the mealybug itself. It helps it to convert what's basically sugar water from the plant into more complex molecules. And we've been able to show that across the range of the new type B and the couple of samples that we've got of the old type, they have completely different symbiont populations within them. And that again strongly supports a very strong variant different difference between these two, and quite possibly a new species, since they're co-occurring in the same areas. They're not exchanging symbionts, and they're clearly not breeding. So what do you have to do with this mealybug? The first thing you have to do is to find it. And as Stuart and Naomi have pointed out, the symptoms are the thing that you will find first, this reddening on the leaves. And then you need to find the mealybug itself. There is a mealybug in that picture. It's just above my thumb. And they are difficult to find. We strongly recommend that you use a hand lens. That's actually quite a large one. The nymphs themselves are, the early stage nymphs are very, very small, but it's these small instars and white feeding instars that are the ones that are doing the damage to the plants. If they are removed, then the plants can actually recover. It's also important to understand the seasonal biology of this beast. And the damaging instars that are feeding up on the foliage are most abundant in spring and summer, from December through to about March, April. And they're the ones that do the damage. From about April onwards, the pink mated females largely disperse into the soil. They go down through cracks in the soil. They can follow the roots down deep into the thatch and into the roots and into the soil and overwinter in the soil. We think they may be reproducing asexually in the soil at that stage, but we haven't been able to prove it, because we find white unmated females, sometimes with young, whereas mated females all turn pink on mating. And so we think that there may be some asexual reproduction through the winter, but basically they can be up to 1 meter underground over winter, and they emerge in the spring, sometimes with young at foot, and they emerge and feed on the plants. So it's that period really from October through to April that you're going to get most of the damage, and that you really have an opportunity to do something about reducing that damage, because those are the ones that are feeding and are easy to get to. In the winter, they can be hiding under cowpats or in thatch or deep in the soil, and they're much harder to control. So what can we do with this beast? And there are 3 basic strategies that you can try. These depend very much on your farming system. We're not telling you what you have to do. We're telling you options that you can try depending on how your farming system works. And there are basically 3 of these, which are about using the pasture that you've got. If you find those mealybugs on your pastures, what do you do about it? How to manage for the future through replanting and managing varieties and legumes. And there's also some hope there, which I'll come back to and talk in a bit. I'm always like hope. We're doing trials on seasonal slashing, grazing, and baling. And the reason we're doing this is because we've seen reports from graziers and agronomists that interventions that reduce biomass at key periods in the spring and early summer, when those mealybug numbers are starting to take off, can actually reduce the mealybug populations and prevent the worst of the dieback, but also, while the grass is still alive, provide some forage or hay that can be used rather than letting it develop all the way through to the death of the grass. This is a classic one where some grass was cut on Banana Station by Josh Connolly to put a fence in, and even several months later, the bottle grass on either side was showing very strong symptoms of dieback, but where the slashing had gone through to put the fence in, there was no dieback in the bottle grass, even though it was surrounded by bottle grass that you can see very clearly there, was suffering terribly from pasture dieback. So grazing, baling, or mulching. Grazing and baling obviously lets you use the feed while it's still there, particularly if you can get onto it in that Christmas to February period when the young mealybugs are coming up and feeding and doing the damage. You also, by getting that grass canopy down, you deprive the mealybugs of food because they're gone. The plant's gone. And it also opens up the plant canopy and reduces thatch, which seems to inhibit the mealybug breeding. Those females and males mate under the canopy, and the females seem to reproduce most strongly down in that thatch layer. So by grazing or baling or slashing, if it comes to it, and we don't mean slashing and leaving the windrow, we mean mulching, taking it right down so you're not leaving a thatch layer on the soil, you're actually mulching it and breaking it right up so that it will form a dispersed vegetation that will rot down quite quickly on the surface. There's a Coonabah station near Rolleston practiced rotational grazing. They found pasture dieback on their property just after Christmas a couple of years ago and moved stock in very quickly to graze that area down. They not only got the grazing value from that grass in February, but they found that the pasture recovered quite quickly. So they reduced the thatch and they reduced the breeding and feeding material that the mealybugs also need by feeding it to their cattle. So the basic message from that is, if you find mealybugs, use it or lose it. We're doing quite a lot of work looking at what we mean by resistance and tolerance to mealybug in particular pasture varieties. And this builds on screening work we did in the reports that were published in 2022. We've developed a rapid laboratory assay that lets us look at how different varieties act as hosts for the mealybug or not. And we found that there are basically 3 different responses from the plant, and they correlate with 3 different responses from the mealybug, where the mealybugs rapidly develop to adults on plants like American buffel. The symptoms also rapidly progress, where the mealybugs will survive, but they don't develop. They sort of sit around as early instar young mealybugs, not really feeding, and they take quite a long time to die. We also see a fairly slow progression of symptoms. These aren't good hosts for the mealybugs, and the mealybugs do eventually die, but they take a very long time to get there. The plants show very little symptoms that don't progress very strongly. And that's a large number of grasses that we observe, and we call them tolerant to the pasture dieback. They include things like Gatton panic and Mekong brysantha, but also some of the tall fescues that have endophytes on board as seed-borne endophytes, and the Italian annual ryegrass lush, which has AR37, another fungal endophyte sold as a seed-borne endophyte on board. The perennial ryegrass without endophytes is quite tolerant in its own right, but annual ryegrass is highly susceptible unless it's got those endophytes on board. And the standouts, which is great for people in temperate areas, are the perennial ryegrasses with the endophytes on board, the epicloe fungal endophytes that were developed in New Zealand to manage their mealybug and other pests of pasture grasses. And they are widely available and sold by seed companies. And the Hummer tall fescue also seems to result in very rapid death of the mealybug and minimal symptoms, if any at all. And several of these grasses, like Mekong brysantha, are very poor hosts. Gatton panic, Mekong brysantha, and all of the grasses with endophytes on board are very poor hosts. They're either toxic or the mealybugs can't really develop very well on them, and they show at most minimal symptoms. This reflects very much what we've seen in the field. Excuse me, I'm just having a trouble getting my slides. Sorry?
I hate to rush you as well, but we may want to finish up soon so we have enough time for our questions and answers.
Okay. So we've seen some breakdowns in costs. This was done at Banana in 2019, where they did a full cost analysis, and they found that replanting with Gatton panic recovered all of their costs within the first grazing round, compared to what would have happened if they just left it with pasture dieback, and gave very good returns. So even though It's quite expensive business. They found that that even the first return gave them great results, and they've grazed that several more times since then. We've worked with Naomi to look at pasture trials, and we've found that where there is a high mass of legumes in with the grasses, you get far fewer mealybugs compared to just there's no response to difference in grass biomass or response to forbs. Even where you have more forbs, you don't necessarily get fewer mealybugs, but where you've got more legumes in the mix, you do get far fewer mealybugs on the grasses that are around them. Obviously, mealybugs don't attack legumes at all, nor do they attack forbs, but legumes seem to have a suppressive effect on the mealybugs themselves. And finally, hope. Hope springs eternal. We've been doing some extensive work on the composition of the fungal communities in soil. This is survey work from 2020, 2021, where we found that there is a very positive correlation with the abundance of beneficial fungi in the soil, in the rhizosphere, and particularly from three taxa of Penicillium, Purpuricillium, and Trichoderma, where they are more abundant. We see pastures recovering, and we see far fewer signs of dieback and fewer mealybugs in the paddocks. We're also seeing, oh, sorry, I should also say that we know that because we've isolated these, that they are producing secondary metabolites, and we're looking at the interactions with Fusarium as the secondary infection that may occur in those sites. And we're seeing now an increase in both the number of parasitoids that are using Heliococcus summervillei. Parasitoids are insects that use the mealybug as a host, rather like the alien does in the science fiction movie, to reproduce and grow. And so these wasp taxa, we've gone up from 2 from surveys in 2021-22 to 5 different taxa. And they're also occurring in late summer in 2021-22. They were there in the spring, probably using other mealybugs in the environment as hosts. Now we know that they're occurring with the peak of the Heliococcus summervillei. And the top wasp there is producing multiple wasps from a single mealybug, which means it has the potential to spread very quickly if it becomes established in the population. The take-home message: this is a pest. You can beat it. You need to monitor it and know the early symptoms so that you can find the mealybugs and be proactive if that mealybug is occurring in your paddocks. You need to manage your crops, and grazing, baling, or mulching when mealybugs strike may be useful to you. We're not saying you have to, but it might be useful. The break and forage crops that are less susceptible hosts for the mealybug may also be useful and give you some forage if you can plant. That tolerant grasses really are the key to replanting, where you can find varieties suitable for your area and where you are able to replant. And we're doing demonstration plots with Gatton Panic and with Mekong Brysantha, which we will be running field days on through next year. Also improving with legumes, because legumes do have a very strong correlation with recovery and reduction in mealybug numbers. And we find also that in the tropics and subtropical pastures, phosphate is a continual problem. Poor phosphate levels are hindering recovery, and we work with agronomists who recommend adding phosphate to the soil at seed planting, so that it's going into the root zone of the soil when planting these improved varieties. So that's it. Very great thanks. Thank you to Naomi for allowing us to use her trials and the graziers that they were there with, particularly to Jake O'Brien, who was with DLF Seeds and is now with Syngenta, who's helping us with many of our pasture mixtures and demonstration plots with varieties, and the farmers that we're working with, Barry, James, Darren, and Jeff, and to our biosecurity colleagues who've been a terrific help in sorting out these questions of the mealybug systematics and its origin. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carrie. That's a great piece of information to end on. There, I think there it is a pest and we can control it. It's fantastic. I will note that we're just about to tick over to 1:30 now in Queensland, and we did slate this webinar to finish in an hour or so. So if you do need to go, please feel free to do so. There is a survey at the end of this if you could fill it out. We are going to switch now into the Q&A session. So if you are able to hang around, please, you're welcome to. But if not, we will send out the recording as well. But to no further degree, we have got a few questions which have come through already. So I think this came through during Naomi's session, which asked about the difference between the natural regeneration and the buffel treatments. So what was the difference?
Between natural regeneration and the buffel? Not a whole lot, actually. Where we replanted with buffel grass, we didn't get much difference at all compared to the natural regeneration. We probably had more Billawilla buffel coming up because the buffel mix that we used did have billow buffel in it. It was all we could get at the time. This is always a challenge, getting the seed that you want and a good quality seed with good germination rates. But yeah, in terms of dieback, there was pretty much no difference between replanting with buffel or natural regeneration. So if I had to choose between the two, I would just use natural regeneration and managing for recovery.
Awesome. There are a few more which came up through your presentation, Naomi, so we might just run through those quickly. Was Rhodes the primary grass in the grass mix at all locations? Were there other species sown?
Yes, so Rhodes grass was the primary. We used Callide Rhodes and Reclaimer Rhodes at all of the sites. We also had in the mix at the northern sites, we had some Gatton Panic and Billawilla Buffel, and in the southern sites we had Gatton Panic and some Purple Pigeon. I didn't include those on the graphs because actually we had very, very little of them come up. We had really big issues with seed germination. I'm sure anybody planting pastures has experienced the difficulty of getting good germinating seed. So basically we just had the Rhodes come up in all of those sites.
Okay, and the last one here is that there was a figure in there around 25 tons per hectare, which seems very high. Do you know why it was so high?
That must be the Gita site, and that was over 4 years, I think, that data. I'd have to just have a look at my slide to be sure, but that would be the 4-year data, I think. Yep, so that was the total over 4 years, 25 tons per hectare.
Okay, wonderful. We do have a few questions around burning and its role in recovery. So I guess the questions are, does burning assist in recovery? And is that because it's reducing the thatch? Is it actually helping? So anyone can get onto that one.
Stuart or Carrie, do you want to go ahead and answer that?
I'll answer if Stuart doesn't want to. Look, there are several problems with burning. The first thing is what's going to come back afterwards is probably the grasses that were there before from the seed bank, which means that they're probably going to be susceptible to the mealybug, and the mealybug will be able to reinvade. So you haven't actually changed the situation. Second thing that happens is when you burn, you gas off some of the nutrients that are in your soil, like nitrogen and phosphate. So you're actually depleting the soil of the nutrients that you need to be able to grow some of the to recover. And the third thing is that if you're burning off in winter, the mealybugs are often underground or dispersed in the environment, and you don't burn deeply enough to be able to get those overwintering populations. So it's a very mixed bag, but the main problem is that once the grasses start to recover from the seed bank, you get recovery of the reinvasion of the mealybug in slightly more nutrient deficient soil. We are going to be using burning where we've got Indian couch. We'll be spraying it out twice with herbicide. And then we'll be going in with a burn to try to reduce the thatch, not because we're trying to control the dieback or the mealybug, but because we're going to then reseed. And if you try to reseed and drill into Indian cooch, the rhizomes will make a complete mess of the process. So we're burning just to try to reduce the biomass of cooch.
So Ryan, I'm not quite sure exactly what the question was about burning, but in our field trials, we've had an annual spring burn, which has been largely ineffective. But I have heard and have seen graziers have been trialling burning or been putting a fire through their commercial paddocks, probably more of a midsummer sort of stage of the season burn. And that seems to be a lot more effective because my understanding would be is that they're actually killing the mealybug that's in the plant canopy at the time. So, but yeah, I mean, as Caroline mentioned, I mean, you're not altering or changing the species composition of the pasture. So if that pasture had mealybugs before, they'll just come back again. And secondly, I suppose also that most guys don't want to have a completely hot burn that nukes everything in the pasture. So there's always some grass that never gets fully burnt out, which means that that's where you can also harvest some more mealybugs too. They can just reinfect the other areas where they're coming back. So it doesn't seem to be that reliable. Some graziers reckon it's the answer for them, but in my experience, looking at a number of different examples or situations, it's a bit hit and miss, unfortunately.
Definitely some interesting conversations there around burning.
I can show one photo there. Sorry, Ryan. This photo here, this with the reddening on the buffle, that's straight after burning, actually. So once the grass has grown back, as soon as we saw the grass appear, we saw dieback symptoms occurring. So it wasn't useful in that instance either.
Yeah, definitely some things there. We've had a few questions around grass variety palatability. So if there's going to be any further any further investigation into grass palatability that we've been using in those variety trials. So that might be the Mekong Briz or the Telegrass as well.
Yeah, I can answer some of those. Yeah, it's a really good question about the palatability of some of these grasses, because there's more to it than just dieback tolerance as such. So there's also obviously palatability of those grasses. There's a question about rainfall requirements for Mekong in particular, from Jill Alexander. So yeah, so you have to sort of obviously pick and choose the right species for the right location, based on the soil type and the rainfall area that you're in. But yeah, some of these grasses, while they might be more tolerant to the mealybug, they're definitely not as palatable for stock. But the real point really is, I think, with some of these more tolerant species is that they're only suited to a very small area of where dieback is affecting pastures across Queensland and New South Wales. So I suppose, applicability from the area or geographical point of view is quite low. So that's probably the main issue. But yes, it's more than just dieback tolerance. They have to sort of consider all the other factors as well.
We find that both Gatton Panic and Mekong Brizantha are highly palatable. And in fact, Naomi will back this up with her trials. The cattle will get in, and that's the first thing they'll go for is the Mekong. They need to be managed, though, and they need to be, really jumped on hard with stock when they get to about knee high or slightly higher. If you start letting them get up to chest height, they've gone too far, and you'll have a lot of trouble getting them down. They are strong, vigorous growing varieties, and they need to be kept as foliar managed for that foliar productivity by hard grazing when they do come up. The other question is the more temperate varieties with the endophytes on board. They're highly palatable ryegrass and fescue varieties for more temperate areas.
Okay, thank you. I've got another question here around heavy grazing. If you use heavy grazing, would this assist with disturbing the mealybug?
Yes, get the timing right. So you don't want to be doing this when there's no mealybugs there. You need to know that you've got mealybugs to do this, unless it's part of your normal rotation. But yes, heavy grazing, you don't want to you don't want to mulch it or burn it if you can feed it to cattle. Heavy grazing gets that thatch down very quickly and can be very beneficial in reducing mealybugs.
In the examples where we have slashed pasture, are we removing the thatch when we're doing that slashing?
Very quickly, there's a difference between slashing and mulching, and we're finding that we needed to be clear about the terminology. If you leave windrow on the paddocks, the mealybugs will use that to get in and breed under, particularly later in the season. When they're overwintering, it can actually foster mealybug survival over the winter. Mulching, on the other hand, where you're really getting it, breaking up the clumps, and where you're spreading it out and cutting it very finely, breaks down much more quickly, and that has appears to have a stronger effect. But windrow is mealybug habitat.
Okay. Carrie, I've got another question for you here. Have you had any success using soft insecticides at various stages of the mealybug's life cycle, or the use of releasing a predator species?
Okay, so insecticides work, but they're not useful. So that's one of the ways that we were looking at, is it a mealybug? We could infest the plants with the mealybug, we could cause the symptoms, but then we could also cure it by using insecticides. And we did some work on several insecticides, including spirotetramat and imidacloprid. The trouble is that they're not economic to use at the kind of scale that graziers need them to work at. And when the effects of the insecticides have worn off, the grasses are vulnerable again. They are not a long-term solution, and they're not a short-term solution either, though we have had some small patch treatments. People like to use them, but we don't recommend them. They're not registered, and they're expensive. So they're not economic for the kind of scale that we need to deal with pasture dieback. They do disturb. So I noticed the question is softer insecticides, so things that don't affect beneficial insects in the same way. Predators we haven't worked with. They're very expensive to use. And again, you're looking at the sort of scale of acreage that grazing pastures cover. Releasing commercial beneficials isn't the way to go. Trying to foster an environment where they might persist is a much more practical way of doing it. We've been looking at the parasitoid wasps, and we're not introducing them. We're looking at natural inserted wasps that are crossing over from other mealybug species into H. somervillei, and it seems to be increasing. It's not there yet. This is not the cavalry, but your friends are out there helping. So I wouldn't be using insecticides in any way that might disrupt them.
Wonderful. Stuart, I have a question for you around the Mekong Brysantha. It's advertised for for greater than 500 mils. Would you plant it in the 550 rainfall area?
No, the short answer is no. I think that's basically too low for that particular grass to persist long term in a pasture. So in that sort of environment, really, it's gonna struggle long term. But yeah, I think it will grow initially, but it definitely won't persist long term. So I would suggest that, yeah, Mekong's a great grass, very productive, puts weight on cattle, but it's probably more of a grass that is suited to higher rainfall or coastal conditions rather than that sort of type of rainfall. I mean, yeah, 500 mil is that sort of, for us in central and southern Queensland, would be basically Roma area, or Emerald Alpha in central Queensland, and that's basically buffalo grass country rather than Mekong.
Thank you, Stuart. Another one for you, Carrie. The results from the fungal community analysis is interesting. Have you done any pot trials with these species to assess dieback severity? And is there potential for inoculation with these beneficial species to reduce dieback in the field?
Hello, Tracy. Yes, is the short answer. We've done pot plants, we've done root colonization tests, we've done mealybug and plant growth responses. to those. That's the advantage of having the actual isolates. We're cutting it down to find to the isolates that seem to have most response. It is possible that they could be used as inoculants. Again, that's an economic question, but we do see natural recruitment of those organisms into the environment, and we find that pastures that have legumes in them seem to foster higher populations, higher abundance of the beneficial fungi when they're present. And we're really interested in what drives recruitment of those fungi into those environments. But we've seen it in real time where you get a spread of like a fairy ring where the grass seems to recover in big circles. And by sampling those plots, we've found some of those isolates are really involved in pasture recovery as well. Yeah, it's been great fun.
Fantastic. I guess this is more of a general question for the various trials. The seed that you've been using, has it been coated or uncoated? Maybe we start with Naomi and the AHR trials.
So the majority of it was coated seed. Purely that's because what the seed companies were providing me with. Stuart, you might be able to comment more.
Yeah, so we've in our field trials, a bit the same as Naomi mentioned, that there's been a combination of coated and uncoated, but mainly has been coated. We actually did have a field trial at the research station called Brian Pastures near Gayndah, where we compared coated Bissett bluegrass seed versus uncoated, and also Gayndah buffle uncoated and coated, and there was no difference. To be honest, we got an inferior plant population with coated seed. Just I think the way that seed was at the time. So my submission from that is that there's no difference in coated or uncoated from a dieback perspective. But there are other I suppose issues that can come from coated seed or uncoated for that matter too.
Yeah. Thanks, Stuart and Naomi. This is another question around maybe the spread of mealybugs. Can farm machines spread mealybugs? And this might be during slashing or when the bugs are present.
Yes, but compared to the distance that wind can spread mealybugs, those early instar nymphs spread very freely on wind fronts. I mean, practicing biosecurity and washdown in moving between farms should be standard practice anyway. So that's, it shouldn't be a question. But can they spread it compared to the way wind will? Wind is an incredibly efficient spreader of these things. So I'm not stressing about that farm machinery, but it should be cleaned down when moving between farms anyway, because let's start with Parthenium, shall we?
Very good point, Gary. Another question we've got here is, what is the solution for a low rainfall area? And I think this is a question that's mainly around what are the species which could be used or whatnot.
Yeah, another good question, another hard one to answer, to be honest. I mean, the short answer is there are very limited options for low rainfall areas, particularly once you get below 600 mils average annual rainfall. There's grass-wise, buffle grasses of the same species. Buffle is the best in that situation. Obviously, there's multiple natives that don't get affected anyway. So, but if a grazie is in that sort of low rainfall area and has got dieback and they've got a buffle pasture, well, there's not much. I can't think of any grass that will really persist long term that can be used to replace that. Yes, there are grasses that you can plant like Rhodes grasses or panics and so forth, but again, long term persistence wise, they're going to really struggle. So the only real answer, I think, in those areas is potentially to put some legume in if legumes aren't there already. So there are some desmanthuses and maybe and definitely some stylos that will grow fairly happily in low rainfall environments, depending on the climatic conditions and the soil type. But I think it probably more comes back to how the paddock's grazing. So grazing management will be more important or very important in those low rainfall areas.
We're doing some demonstrations with James Speed out at Goodliff, which is near Mantuan Downs, and they've been going great guns. And I'm just trying to find the exact variety that we've been using and it's in our report. So if you give me a second, I'll look that up.
No worries. Maybe whilst you're looking that up, we can ask this next question, which is, do mealybugs attack any pest grasses? So the example they used here is African lovegrass. And if they could, if they do, could they be transferred to thatched lovegrass pastures?
They seem to like the same things cattle like. So we haven't seen much good news in terms of them attacking pest grasses. Sorry.
So I was going to add to that my colleague's experience in southern Queensland is finding that, yes, African lovegrass is affected by mealybugs and dieback. So,
oh, hooray!
But what level and whether it, fully wipes it out, I don't quite know at this stage, but they are definitely finding symptoms on African lovegrass.
Yeah, we also find symptoms on things like kangaroo grass. So it's not, don't spread this around.
Okay. Carrie, I don't know if you've found that little bit of information around that second to last question. But we look like we've received most of the questions there now, so we haven't got any more to go through.
Nearly there. I've found the document. I'm just scrolling through to the photographs of the paddocks, and that will have what that mix is. Where are we? It's that's it. It's a mixed pasture. So we're doing mixed pastures. It's Gatton Panic, Cattenbora Rhodes, Woolly Pod Vetch, and Lucerne. And it's dry lucerne, it's not irrigated. And that's at Goodlift, Mantuan Downs.
Wonderful. Right. Thank you. Well, with that, we might call a close to the webinar. Thank you all very much for attending and staying on with us for this extended Q&A session. I'd like to thank our speakers, Naomi, Stuart, and Carrie. It's great to have you on this webinar to share your expertise and your experiences. I'd also like to acknowledge Meat and Livestock Australia for funding this work, and the grower collaborators and teams who've contributed to the trials and the data that we've discussed today. Just a reminder that this session has been recorded and it will be uploaded to the AHR website. I'll email you out a link once it is available, so you can revisit any material from this webinar and this question session and share it with your colleagues as well. If you'd like any further information, you can of information, updates, or resources, you can visit the AHR website or the websites that Stuart and Carrie mentioned, or you can contact Naomi, Stuart, or Carrie directly. Before we wrap up, there will be a quick questionnaire at the end of the session once you close out of this webinar. Be really grateful if you could spend a few minutes or so to complete it. It's really valuable feedback to us. It helps to shape the direction of our work and improve any future webinars as well. So once again, thank you for your participation, your questions, and your ongoing interest in these pasture dieback projects. And I hope you have a great afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you at our future events.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Stu, Carrie.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all. That was great.
All right. Thank you.